Well, welcome everyone. Nice to be with you all, wherever you may be in the world. Isn't it interesting that no matter where you are, it's almost become a trite saying, you're always here, aren't you? In a sense, it's all these conventional notions we have that language suggests a kind of spatiality, and you could say a lot of experience seems to suggest a space, a three-dimensional space that we're in, a here and a there, right? And but as I'm often saying and inviting people to look at experience itself and discovering how different it actually is than so many of the ideas we have about what's going on. And that notion of there being, I mean, we just take it for granted. Yes, there's here, I'm here, and other things are over there. But my experience doesn't have that actually difference or that separation between something called a here and a there. So I really invite you to look at your experience right now, which is the only thing you are ever looking at anyway, right? Noticing what's here, this experience. I like to call it this because it's not laden with any sort of ideas. It's just this that's here. And let's explore this, since there's nothing else to explore, right? And look at it, and in the looking, maybe discover some things about it that we sometimes don't recognize, that maybe we don't fully get to enjoy because it's just not being noticed. So notice the way in which what's here, this experience, has no inside or outside to it. Again, I was hearing somebody the other day, I've been doing some like yoga. It's been feeling nice, and the yoga instructor was talking about like going inside. And she said that, and I was thinking, what are you talking about? Going inside? As opposed to what? Yeah, so just feel the way in which inside, like what does that mean? I mean, go outside of whatever you imagine is not inside. Go outside, say, of the self. And you go there, and is it inside? Is it outside? It's the experience transcends outside, inside. There's no inside or outside. There's just this. Just like there's no here or there. There's just, we could say it's all just here, or it's all just there. I mean, when those distinctions are seen to be not hold up under scrutiny, then it doesn't matter whether you call it here or there. Maybe one word or the other might be more evocative of recognizing that which is beyond those distinctions, but basically no word suffices. Is it here? Is it there? Is it inside? Is it outside? It just is, with no seeming distinction in those kinds of ways. I just feel the way that is the case. Experience transcends those distinctions, just obviously. Notice also the way in which this experience that's here, again, I mean, I'm giving a word to what's here, but there can't really, let's just say something that's present, this moment that's present, is feel the way, notice the way in which you absolutely cannot find the beginning of this. When does this begin? Nor can you find when this ends. This is outside of that framework of beginning and ending, isn't it? It's just immediately, less than the snap of a finger. It's just here. And experientially, I mean, in our minds, conceptually, we may be able to trace what we think of as what's led up to this instant, what came before it. But experientially, we never experience what came before. We always just experience this instant. This is what we're experiencing right now, is this. It's like sometimes people will refer to it like a point event. Like it's just a tiny, 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 what we would call now, the immediacy is just, and feel when is it actually now? Feel this, how small, infinitesimally small, what we might call the moment is, how it's just here, but it has no, what's here doesn't hold still, right? It has no duration to it. So we can't really say whether the moment, whether what's here is appearing, or has it appeared, or is it disappearing? Is it in an activity of appearance or disappearance, of arising or of passing away? It's so beyond time, isn't it? Feel the way in which that is so. And in its ever vanishing, non-durational nature, what's here, right? How it can't really be, you can't really grasp hold of something, can you? The moment can't be, it's not holding in place, it's not holding still, which is why we can't actually locate it and define it and pin it down. Because whatever we've seemingly been able to pin down is not here anymore. So we're playing in imagination, we're playing in memory when we're defining and pinning down seemingly what's here. Just feel the way that this is so ungraspable. And yet what's so wild is, despite what you could call its radical discontinuity, that it keeps vanishing, it keeps disappearing, has no continuation to it, there's the sense of what's here is absolutely uninterrupted. It's continuous. It doesn't go away. It's ever present. It's just constant. There's a constancy to what's here. Even as what's here is in flux. So it's very seemingly contradictory, constant but always in flux, but constant but always in flux. You really can't say whether it's either one of those, because again, you can't pin it down, right? You can't define it. And notice the way in which what's here is also here effortlessly. In other words, there's no sense that John, the person, or John, the personality, is somehow generating what's here. The feeling is it's just simply sustaining itself, creating itself, generating itself somehow. It's self-shining. It shines on its own, doesn't it? And we are, whatever we might be, we're just experience. And so the experience of what we think of as our life is also this effortless shining, isn't it? this effortless appearing, this effortless emanation of life, the apparition of life. This is all what we're experiencing. This is not philosophy. This is just what's being felt right now. Another astonishing thing is that you can't find anything else but this. There's not something else. There's just this. I mean, maybe hypothetically there's something else. But if you were to discover the something else, it would be this. It would always just be this. It always would be just what's here. There is no other reality. This is the whole thing. Notice how in its shape-shifting, ever morphing, in this sort of state, if you will, of constantly becoming something else, like it feels like an opening that just doesn't like stop for a moment and then open a little bit more and then stop, and it's like never, it's just this constant I don't know if you can see in the cloud picture, and that for those who are seeing images, the clouds are such a great metaphor for this, that they're in this, they're reshaping themselves in this endless reshaping. And we can also feel right now is how completely unpredictable the reshaping is, right? Like we're literally being, you could say, being taken on a ride. We are the ride. We are the one being taken and the ride itself. I mean, it's an inseparable flow, right? But it's always unexpected. It's always a surprise. It's never predictable. What is the way that the way the moment will shape itself is not predictable. Every thought, everything that we might call a thought, a feeling, a sensation, completely unpredictable. How that will arise and take shape and reshape itself and appear or disappear. It's just wholly unpredictable. Notice how it's not possible for what's here to be any other way than the way that it is. We might be engaged at times in the game of like wishing it would be different, wondering why it is the way that it is, trying to be more open to it, more accepting of it, less judging of it, and on and on and on. But meanwhile, it just is as it is. And the whole process of accepting or rejecting what's present here is sort of beside the point in a way. It just is already here. It's already been allowed, in a sense. The universe has already made room for this moment to be here, because here is the moment. So it's been radically, if you want to use the word acceptance, it's been radically accepted. Everything that's here has already been we're late to the game, like saying, oh, I'm going to be in some sort of orientation to it that's more accepting and open. It's like, no, it's just here. It's already the radical openness of reality itself, just being itself, exploding as however it is, shining forth however it is. Notice the way in which the field of experience, the field of this, is unthinkably so richly like detailed with all these little specific details, little, just the way the wind is moving the tree out my window, and particular colors, and very specific sounds of these birds that they're making, and the way my hands are formed in this particular way, and the fly that's just flying across my window, and all these just infinite details in the field of experience. And yet it shows up as all these seemingly separate pieces, detailed pieces in the field. But it's just a singular field of aliveness. Everything is alive. Everything is this life. Everything is this aliveness. The presence of what is. And notice how we're engaging in this process of noticing what's here. Call it experience, call it the field, call it this. But it's like we are the field, noticing the field. In other words, we're not, feel the way in which whatever you imagine yourself to be is without an edge. In other words, experientially, no edges can be located. So it's much more like the field of experiencing, feeling itself as the field of experiencing, not like a person noticing the field of experience as somehow it's separate, like on the outside over here looking at the field or feeling the field. It's like it's just the field of experiencing. Completely seamless. Feel the complete openness of the field. Every seeming piece of the field is open to every other seeming piece of the field. In other words, no boundaries anywhere between anything. Everything mixing together and yet seemingly discrete, but everything completely mixed together in this boundless, seamless soup of life. We're often looking for something else, some other moment, right? But in this very instant of experiencing is everything that's longed for by the human slash spiritual seeker. All the openness, all the fullness, all the wholeness, all the vitality, all the boundlessness, um, all the ease. Is right in this very moment, just as it is. And in a sense, that's always the case, but somehow there's the sense that when there's a noticing or an appreciation of the fact of what's here, of how full it actually is, how indescribable it actually is, how boundless and borderless it is, how ungraspable it is, um, how transcendental it is, we get to, when that's noticed, as we're noticing it right now, we get to enjoy that. We get to enjoy those kind of primal qualities, you could say, of what's here, which really are beyond all of our classical descriptions and definitions of things. It's perfect. It's the great perfection, as they say in Tibet, in the Tibetan tradition. Perfect in the sense of it transcends the normal categories of perfect and imperfect. In that sense, it's perfect because it's lacking nothing. Lack and limitation is simply a way, sometimes the consciousness describes this as somehow missing something, lacking something, not enough. But what's here, it can't be pinned down again, right? As I was saying, like the clouds are constantly shifting their shape. You can't pin them down, what their shape is. How can you describe the moment as lacking if you can't pin down the moment? Well, you can't pin down the moment. And that's why it has no lack. It has no definition. Well, we can say the felt sense of that indefinability, indescribability is a kind of fullness and completeness. You could also just call it the absence of any lack, but we could put it in a more positive term that it's just this energetic, emanating, shining, isn't it? Isn't it right here, the shining? You are the shining. Everything is the shining. Our moments of difficulty are the shining that we describe as difficult. Our moments of confusion that we describe as confusion are the shining of this basic indescribability underlying each moment. It can show up as everything and everything that it shows up as, seemingly. But it's never merely what we're calling it or labeling it or describing it. It's much, 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 much more than that. Unfathomably more, endlessly more. What's cool is that I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, how the sense of the field of this is that it's holographic in the sense that each seeming little piece of it, the tiniest little seemingly insignificant piece of it, is the whole, right? Because it's like a tiny point in the sky is inseparable from the whole of the sky, isn't it? It's made of the sky. So every little point of experience, every little instant of experience, no matter how it's being labeled and described, is none other than the absolute reality, the transcendental reality. So that's this little free ebook that I pulled together from some of the memes that I've been writing over the last couple of years. It's called Everything is a Doorway. And that's why I call it that, because everything is a doorway into the same fundamental infinite reality. Everything is a doorway because everything is made of that, whatever everything is made of, which just can't be said. So that makes it's kind of convenient, because in a sense, you're always walking through the door. You're always entering the doorway. The doorway is just this. You don't have to go anywhere else or experiencing anything else other than what you're experiencing, because this is it. I'd be happy to hear from any of you that might like to explore anything happening for you around this investigation of our experience.
Hi, John.
Hey, Ed, nice to see you.
What it occurs to me is that your first comment about there's no inside or outside,
Yeah.
and what you're talking about, I think, is that what is experience without a reference point?
Mhm.
Most of us have the reference point of our body,
Right.
and so inside and outside is very clear. What is outside of our body and what is inside of our body?
Right.
What is known to others and what is unknown to others?
Uh-huh.
And so what you seem to be describing is what is it like, what is experience like without these reference points,
Right.
either physically or memory?
Mm-hmm.
What is there without that reference point?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, in a sense, like if you just feel the presence of your experience right now, experientially, you really can't find the reference point. That's what's kind of interesting. The reference points are kind of overlaid on top of it. Reference points are conceptual. Nothing wrong with them. I mean, they're part of how this can show up with all sorts of reference points, right? So we're just encountering another, you could say, perspective, which is one without reference, in a sense, as you were saying, referenceless. And it's just open-ended, just wide open. There's no. I mean, it's funny because if you think of it, the classic reference point is as the viewer of all of this, right? As the seer of all of this, as the experiencer. That's the fundamental or sort of unquestioned reference point, isn't it? The reference point of being someone. But experientially, if you feel into the experiencer, forget about thinking what you might be or what any of us might be, and you feel what is it that's seeing and experiencing and noticing what's here. Again, you can't find a point, you can't find any boundary around that. So the reference point disappears. And then there's just seeing. There's not really a seer, there's just seeing. So the reference point of the seer can be seen through, in a sense, recognized to be arbitrary and a fine reference point. And again, what of course happens, we all know very well, is that some of these presumed to be true reference points, particularly of being someone in a world, bring with it a whole host of not infrequently uncomfortable implications, right? Like I'm potentially at the mercy of a cruel and heartless world that might destroy me at any moment. And those could even include things that people say about me. Forget about, cataclysms of a physical nature. It's like, no, it's like, but that reference point, again, it's like, it just really, there's a whole different feel, a whole different sense of what life is like from the referenceless perspective. There's not one thing threatening another thing from that perspective, is there? There's just experiencing with no reference point.
So that's some kind of a skill or something to be able to drop your reference point and then to have it reemerge when it's useful, and then drop it when it's not important.
Yeah, I mean, one way I might describe it is that, I mean, the mechanics of just the discovery of what I'm talking about, or I don't claim to understand if there even are mechanics. I think it's like everything else, somewhat magical as to how one comes to discover anything, quite frankly, about their experience. But it's sort of like, for me, it's like, that's why at the very beginning, I was like, let's look at what's here. Let's not assume because we have this rich language and vocabulary that it seems to have created all these reference points and seemingly distinct pieces, selves and worlds and so on, split the world up into all these seeming parts. Let's just look and see what's here, and can we find, what I mean, do you feel like, when you feel experience right now, flow of experience, in other words, feeling whatever's here, do you actually find a discrete reference point, an identifiable boundary line separating, say, the seer from the seen? Or do you just find seeing or experiencing? That's really that's the question, or the invitation to look and see, basically, like look under the microscope of your experience and see if you find a reference point. And then when you just, if I don't find the reference point, so I'm just speaking from this vantage. So that's interesting that I don't find a reference point, because I've presumed for a long time that there was one. And yet that sense of there being a reference point can absolutely, and does absolutely, reappear in my experience. But so what? It's kind of like, it's not, I used to think that that was a big problem, that I had to somehow, oh, if that reappears, and I need to do something to drop it again or see through it again. And it's like, that can be a fine activity to keep going back and recognizing, because it's such a habit, let's say, of seeing the other referenced perspective, right, of a self in a world, let's say. So it can be useful to keep going back and sort of kind of retraining almost of perception, to recognize like, well, that's not the only reality. There's this other way of experiencing what's here, right? That's with no place to stand on, in a sense, a groundlessness that's turns out to be really delicious. And but what's so interesting is that because the seeming reference points are ultimately referenceless, in other words, they appear like I can everything can appear and does appear, and it can appear as being what we might call separate. This appearance can show up as two separate beings having a conversation, right? But because that isn't actually, like, I can look and see that it can look like that, but it's like mirage-like, right? It can look like there's water in the desert, but I can look again and I can see, well, no, I can't find that there. It's mirage-like. I can't find the reference point as a discrete, definable, pin-downable thing. So then there's just this increasing sense of like, then it's fine if those seeming reference points reappear. Who cares? Because there's more and more of a kind of just familiarity with the fact that that doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
And it seems like we can then play with reference points.
Sure, why not?
I can take you as the reference point and see reality through your eyes, or a tree's reference point, or
well, yeah, I mean, in a certain way, Ed, it's part of what we're talking about is a sense of there being an other, right? And that's the singularity of reality, the wholeness, the undivided reality is constantly doing this thing of becoming seeming another, in a sense, like in a way, it almost seems to be basic to experiencing at a certain level, which is to experience the tree and enjoy the apparition of that, or the climbing of that, or the picking fruit from that. It has to, in a sense, show up as other. So it's like in order to have relationship between two things, two people, or relationship between a person and an animal, a person and a lake and a boat, and it's like it almost has to do that dance of becoming seemingly split from itself to then have a relationship with itself. But meanwhile, it's dancing with itself. So it seemed to have split itself into John and Ed, and then John and Ed have a conversation like we're having now. But it's actually the infinite reality having a conversation with itself. And it shows up as two people having a conversation. But it's like the two waves, they're like crashing into each other, or they're dancing with each other out in the sea. But it's just one ocean. But it can definitely look like pieces in relationship to other pieces, right? It's pretty wild. It's wonderful too. I mean,
where is Julie?
some gorgeous place. Way far away from California where I am. But my experience of any of you, wherever you are, I mean, I know Zoe's in France, and Sam is, I think, in the UK. Ed, I don't know where you are in the US, but this is a very interesting talk about referenceless. Like, my experience of each one of you, I could talk about you as being somewhere else, but it's complete intimacy, Because my experience of you is my experience of you, which is what could be more intimate than my experience. It's like, it's me. So from that perspective, there's no separation. You are all showing up here as part of my universe. Undeniably. You're like flavors of my universe, which is, so nice. And presumably I'm showing up as a flavor in your universe. But I don't know that. I don't know what your universe is like. I never will.
Unless I tell you.
You can tell me, and this is what we do in language, right? We try to convey one another's universes to each other. But I don't know. I don't know what it's like. What's it like? What's it like for you to look, to look at anything, to look at, you look at this is my external hard drive here. We'd say that's the color is black, right? And let's say we have some like collective agreement of the color of this as being black, but what is the experience of this like for you to look at this color? What is the encounter with black like for you in this case, or any other color? Well, or the blue in this pen here. I'll never know.
Well, you'll never know what it's like for you either.
That's true too. except that I'm intimately familiar with what it's like, even if I can't ultimately say what it's like. So we're intimately familiar with our own experience because we're not familiar with anything else. What else is there to be familiar with? This is reality. So we are, it's like you take a bite of food, you're very intimately familiar with what that is, even if you can't ultimately convey it in words or concepts.
So I'm in the Theosophical Society Library in Wheaton, Illinois. In your view of things, I live near there.
Very cool. Great. It looks like you're in a library.
Hi, John.
Hi, Sam.
Kind of on that point, recently I've been sort of playing around with the idea of seeing experience as almost like a piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
So like sensations,
Mm-hmm.
like a strand of thought or a strand of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that quite helpful in that you approach it more as like appreciating whatever it is rather than analyzing it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah, just something I've been working with recently, and it seems to work fairly well, or at least,
Yeah. I wrote something a little while back called "The Painting That Is Your Life" or something like that. And I was playing with that metaphor of a painting, and how it's a beautiful metaphor, much like the dream metaphor. The dreams may be a little bit better because dreams are obviously alive and moving, whereas paintings are kind of holding still. But it's more like if you're a Harry Potter fan at all, the paintings they're like the photographs at least are alive, aren't they? Like on the walls. And so in a sense, we're like, I love the painting metaphor though, because we can look at a painting and it looks like there's all these separate things that we could name, right? There's the tree and there's the person on the boat, like, and there's the flowers and there's right. So there's all these objects, or there's the but it's actually just one there's just one painting, right? There's no separate things, there's just one painting.
Yeah.
And but this is back to the idea of the reference points. Like we typically think of ourselves as like, I'm over here looking at the painting of life. But actually you are the painting of life.
Mm.
You're not looking at it. You are the painting of life, or you're part of the painting of life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the dream analogy, as I was mentioning, is such a good one, because every night we go to sleep and we dream. If we dream, a whole world, right? People, places, things, relationships, joys, sorrows. I mean, it's something, isn't it? And it definitely seems like there's all these pieces, all these separate, like I'm having a relationship with someone in my dream, let's say. Like there's two things there, two people having a relationship. But it's one dreaming consciousness, isn't it? Giving rise to all this seeming separation and parts and pieces. But it's one thing, it's all made of the same thing. And we can't really say exactly like what's causing the dream to arise. We could say that consciousness somehow is producing the dream, just like a projector might be producing the movie. But in a sense, we can come back to what we think of as our waking life and say, okay, well, so here it looks like Sam and John again having a conversation, but what's producing Sam and John? What's giving rise to Sam and John? What's enlivening Sam and John, these two characters in the waking life? What is that? Well, there's no way to say, is there? Like something is, I mean, go down to the subatomic particles that make up Sam and Sam's consciousness in his body. You know, what's the activating force underlying everything about you as a creature? Every single cell and molecule and personality characteristic and firing of neurons and all of it. Like what's the energizing force of that? What's the energizing force of all of this, of the trees outside your window, or the, you know, the water that flows, you know, in you know, I mean, everything is we could say the question I'm essentially asking is, what is the basis of everything? What's the foundation? But sometimes when we hear that, like, or the source, you know, we think like it's something somehow apart from this. But it's like whatever is here, whatever is appeared is the foundation. Is made of the foundation, just like the dream is made of its foundation. It's made of consciousness, right?
You know, I was thinking about dreaming. We assume that the waking character is having the dream. But the waking character only exists during waking state. Who is the actual dreamer, I was thinking. And you know, there you go.
There you go. Off the deep end. You always end up off the deep end. But yeah, it's you know, us human creatures, you know, one of the things that we're often doing is we're trying to come up with some way to understand it, to map it, to structuralize what's going on here, to explain it. And again, if we feel what's here, it can become quickly apparent how incomprehensible it really is, how unfathomable it actually is. I mean, really, how could you possibly explain the miracle of what's here? How could you explain the miracle of what's here? Any aspect of it. It's just utterly beyond comprehension.
Yeah, the confusion is we think we know a little bit. We just need to know a little bit more.
Right. And then it will all come into clarity. Yeah. But it's I don't know. I mean, every time I look, it just reveals its inexplicable nature somehow. So we can use, metaphors like the dream or the painting, and I'll use them in my writing sometimes to try to illustrate some sort of aspects of what's going on here that might be being overlooked or taken for granted or totally missed completely, but it's what's most potent is just to come back, to not just rely too much on the metaphor, but just come back to what's here, what's here now. Like what's concrete, what would you say is concretely here experientially? What would you say? All of the ideas that we might have about what's going on here, a body, like, okay, that's an idea. Well, what's concretely here that we're calling a body? Experientially. Not cells, and tissues and organs, but experientially, what's here? Feel that. The body's a semantic label that we apply to what? To an experience. What's the experience? What's actually here? That's how you discover emptiness, ironically enough, is go to what's most concrete. That's where you find the insubstantial. Because it's only in the abstractions that we can imagine that there's something that's stably here, right? But when it's like you go feel what's here concretely, and you will see that it's, like I said at the outset, it has no duration. It's here, but it keeps vanishing. How long is this moment here for? This concretely present moment, how long is it here for? No time. How can you say anything about it? And yet that thing that's impossible, it's not here for any time, and it's impossible to say anything about it, shows up as the flow of time. It shows up as all this stuff, the stuff of life, doesn't it? So it's not like it doesn't negate the dream in a sense. Like seeing that it's a dream doesn't negate the presence of the dreaming. It's just recognizing that, oh, it's not what you think it is. It's more than that, or it's beyond that. It transcends that. But it doesn't, just like with separation, it doesn't, seeing that there's no self and other doesn't necessarily make the sense of self and other go away either. It's just recognizing that it's just showing up as a flavor of life. Like recognizing that the past doesn't exist. You can't find in your experience anything called the past, can you? You can just find this actuality of this moment. It doesn't negate the experience of memory and the sense of there being a kind of an echo of something that had come before, right? So nothing's negated in a sense, everything's included. Reality includes everything, doesn't it? Interpretations aren't negated. They're just recognized to be not able to capture the fullness and the richness and the fathomless infinite nature of this. But it doesn't somehow eradicate interpretations, because what are interpretations made of? They're made of pure, perfect divinity like everything else. I mean, interpretations are a miracle, aren't they? Thoughts are, the big bogeyman in spirituality. Thoughts are absolute miracle. What is a thought? There's this is what I mean by the mirage-like nature. And this is a very curious aspect of our experience, which is, take something like thought. If I were to say, okay, go ahead and think about your mother, okay, just bring up to thought your mother. And you say, okay, I'm having thoughts about my mother right now. My mother's from Greece. She passed away 5 years ago. Those are all thoughts, right? How do I know that there's something there called thought? Because I just do. It's like a presence of something that I'm describing as thought, like a pattern of something. I don't know what. But I could say it's actually there as an experience. But then when I go to look for what the thought is, I try to find it. I can't find it. It's there, but I can't find it. Just like a mirage, like a rainbow. Try to find it. Anything you might name in your experience, go try to locate where it is, what it's made of, its definition, and you won't be able to.
You can't get too close to find it.
You can get as close as you want, The closer you look, the more ambiguous it becomes. Get really close.
Well, it's like the pot at the end of the rainbow. You
Yeah.
could see it from a certain distance, but if you
Right.
get close,
It goes up in a puff of smoke. Exactly. Just like the Impressionist painting. Look really close at this thing that you're calling you. Look really close. What is it? What's it made of? Feel the sense of your own being, existence, life. Feel that. It's obviously here, isn't it? Undeniable, that sense of aliveness, the presence of existence. Now, look really closely. What is that? As experience, what is it?
what is anything at zero distance? There you go.
That's right. And yeah, and in a very real sense, it is zero distance, because the one who's looking at what life is or what beingness is life, is beingness. So you're looking at the thing from the thing. So there's no separation. I sometimes laugh when I think about this, how I was having a conversation with a friend once about this when I was writing my last book, and it was like earlier drafts, and I was like saying, don't you think like everybody's interested in the questions that I'm exploring here? Like, and she looked at me like, no, I don't. I said, what do you mean? It's like, what could be more fascinating than this question of like, what actually, you know what I mean? It's so funny. I was like, really? I mean, of course, I know that that's true, that not everyone is interested. But it sometimes makes me laugh only because here we are, and it's like, we have this sense of being here. Like, wouldn't we just be naturally curious, like what that is, that sense? Oh, we're having thought. Wouldn't we be curious what that actually is? Like, what is thought? Instead, no, we don't seem to be. I don't understand exactly, but other than, I guess I could say at some point I wasn't that interested. So I guess in that sense I can understand it.
Yeah, again,
It explains why I've sold so few books.
well, everybody sells so few.
No, it's kind of like, how much interest is there actually? Well, maybe it's a, and you can't explain it. Like, here are those of you who are on the call, however many of you, 6 or 7 or 8 of you, it's like, isn't it interesting? Like, you're curious, something about this is compelling to you, this investigation of what's here, this tasting of what's here and exploring its nature. Isn't that interesting? How that interest arises in us inexplicably, or maybe it doesn't.
Well, I think, a clue might be this distance thing, that most people live in this, 6 to 8 foot distance from things, and that's their reality.
Mm-hmm.
If they've ever gotten too close or too far, then they see a different reality and their interest comes about.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just stay in that middle distance, everything is explainable, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, you could say that people get by okay without, like, it's not necessarily necessary at all to explore with a kind of precision and depth into the nature of our experience. I mean, people, it's not necessary, right? People can live their lives without having to explore these things, clearly. At the same time, we don't have to look very far to see how much suffering people are experiencing, what we would call suffering. And I would say we largely suffer because of what we think things are, not because of what they actually are. I mean, the sense that a human is lacking something is probably, at the root of so much of what we might call human suffering. And what leads us to believe that we're missing something right now, that this moment is not enough, is the way it's being conceived, the way it's being defined, not what it actually is. So in that sense, the inquiry I write about and meet with others around is incredibly pragmatic in terms of revealing how nothing is missing. Like how endlessly rich the moment is, without having to add anything to it to make it special. It's already yeah, I mean, no words for it.
I think I'm just thinking of people that are popular, like Eckhart Tolle. Somehow he talks about this stuff without removing all reference points. He keeps enough reference points to keep people on board or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. That it can feel like if you're stripping away all the reference points, that somehow that's not going to be very attractive to people. Um, but it's so joyful, actually, to have the reference points stripped away. It's such a relief. But at first glance, that may not feel that way. Like some of my students, it's like, well, ambiguity and uncertainty, that doesn't feel comfortable. It's like, well, you have to become more familiar with it to discover how amazing it actually is. To feel how unknowable this is. In the sense of being able to define it unknowable.
Yeah, if you want to be more popular, you have to stop saying unknowable.
Yeah. Be very happy to, I know some of you often join the calls. I'm always happy to hear from anyone that might feel moved to share anything or explore anything. No pressure, just an invitation. I wrote this poem. Someone was asking me to share some poetry as part of a thing she's doing. And so I was looking through some of my old books and where I was writing more poetry and trying to pull out some ones that, and I came across one that I remember liking a lot. It's called something like This Living Dharma. And I'm just thinking about, like, the words of the teaching and the teachers, and that's like the Dharma is the teaching, right? And the living Dharma, in that poem, I just talk about how, like, this is the living Dharma. Like, this moment is the Dharma. It's not something that was uttered 1,000 years ago by some supposed sage. I mean, it's that too, but this very instant, whatever is arising experientially is the Dharma. It is the Dharma of, in other words, reality is teaching us, in a sense, what it is in every instant. It's showing us what reality is. That's the Dharma. It's showing us its ever complete, full, whole, seamless, boundless, open-ended, indefinable nature. That's the living Dharma. It's not some past tradition. I mean, that's because here it is now. This is the Dharma. So all the words that I might speak are their aim is really to direct you back to explore the nature of your experience and discover its nature. And that's discover how it is the living Dharma, your experience. There's no other, there was nothing else, as I was saying, there's nothing else to explore, right? Here we are. This is the it's like, it's just funny how you take something like, becoming more aware or something like, and spending years and years, excuse me, years and years and years practicing to become more aware. And meanwhile, reality itself is generating effortlessly, spontaneously, inexplicably, miraculously wakefulness right now. This moment, I mean, this moment is, if there is a moment, and let's all say there is a moment here, apparently, a moment in the sense of something here, is absolutely the shine of reality's capacity to know, i.e., wakefulness, isn't it? Just being generated by life itself. So that's what I mean. That's the living Dharma. Like life itself is showing its nature, this awake, spontaneously, immediately wakeful nature, isn't it? Right here. No matter what we're doing. In that sense, it doesn't matter what we're doing. And yet, we, as a seeming individual, can notice the fact that, which again, my words are just directing your attention back to notice something that's, reality is here, knowing itself in this moment, isn't it? Whether you're sitting on a cushion contemplating that or not, just sitting here, just as you are. Pure wakefulness, crystal clear clarity, isn't it? What else is there? Honestly, what else is there? Well, I feel constricted or unconfused or caught up in some whirlpool of worry. That's what's here, crystal clear. That's the meditation. That's what's present. Life meditating, you could say. Life shining forth as whatever it's shining forth as, and being known as whatever it's being known as in that moment perfectly, always. And we're, of course, not separate from that life. It's not like it's over there doing its amazing thing. I mean, it is over there and it's right here doing us, doing each one of us. everything about us. And everything else. I'll sometimes make this distinction, it's like when I'm talking to my grad students, and in psychology, there's a lot of talk about acceptance. I mentioned that earlier, and it's starting to become more in vogue, and it's tied in with conversations in psychology about mindfulness and its applications in mental health. And I don't need to go into that, but I make this distinction for them, which is completely novel to them, as you might imagine, of like, there's a personal, a way one can personally cultivate seemingly awareness and openness and acceptance and non-evaluative kind of way of being in the world. And then there's a transpersonal or impersonal openness, acceptance, awareness, and so on. And the transpersonal one is just here, irrespective of whatever the person is doing. And that's what I'm talking about, is that reality is already completely open to everything. It is everything. It's pure openness. That's not something that I'm doing as a person. It's just being done by life itself. It's impersonal. Just like I was saying with wakefulness, yeah, I can feel that sense of I'm a person and I'm becoming more wakeful. I understand that reference point, Ed, as we were talking about before. That's fine, it's a reference point. And I can make this distinction between being wakeful or being less wakeful, but reality is just wakeful, period. There's no opposite condition. Reality is just open. There's no opposite condition. Reality is undivided. There's no opposite condition. And it's not that way because of something I'm doing or not doing. It just is that way. And that can be recognized potentially by looking at what's here, by noticing the way life is, by noticing the way the flow of reality is right now.
Yeah, on that point, John, I often find it useful just to kind of see or get a taste of how everything is here instantly.
Yes.
There's no thing, it's no sort of gradually appearing or it's being produced or generated. It's just everything is here immediately now.
Yes.
And that's it.
Exactly.
And that I found really useful. Just the immediacy of everything.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Including us, what we think of as ourselves, just here, inexplicably, immediately, with nothing that led up to it somehow.
When you say immediate, you sort of point to a very small piece of time.
Right.
When in actuality, there's no time.
Right.
Immediate. And so there's two different perspectives, a small amount of time and no time.
Right. Right. I mean, for purposes of discussion, it's like we could say something's here. There's an appearance. Something's present. But I 1,000% would concur with what you just said, that its appearance is happened outside of time. So it can't be delineated as to at what point did it appear. It's just here, outside of time. I mean, that makes no sense, but here it is.
Hi, John.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, good morning. I joined late. I was in another meeting. Along the line of what you were just sharing, so, sitting here right now, and there's some sense of equanimity, some sense of presence, a presence that is holding the, what's going on in the mind in terms of worry and so forth, the ordinary stream of thoughts and feelings, and yet I was wondering, what is it that once and for all radically undermines, all of that concern, or you might say, and I don't want to speak for you, but that you or Peter might respond by saying that the worry and the concern is just a manifestation of the presence, so it's not a problem. But I remember years ago, someone pointed out that, I didn't read this directly, but it was quoted. I think it was Milarepa said that, thinking like when you're a person doing spiritual practice or meditating or trying to approach, say, the nature of mind, thinking, is this it? Am I getting close? All of that is a form of suffering,
Definitely.
of agitation. So what is it that once and for all cuts the root of that, so that one can truly be established in peace?
Yeah, I think it always comes back to me to seeing the way things are kind of more fundamentally, we could say. And that, so the ordinary, if you were saying a conventional stream of thinking that can include things like worry and fear and concern and self-loathing and all the things that humans can often struggle with. What if you take something like worry, okay? We all know what that is. If I say, hey, I'm worrying about how my daughter's doing, like, okay, so, okay, what have I actually, I've just described something. I've just attempted, or consciousness has attempted to render that, to designate it with a description, right? So now, for sure, I mean, there's kind of a conventional sense that that's an uncomfortable, potentially very painful state, and we prefer to not have it. And the presence of that state is also evidence of something being wrong with us, and lack of our either mental health and or spiritual awareness, blah blah blah. But the exploration that I'm engaging in with people is all about, like, okay, we have an opportunity with, I was saying earlier before you got on the call, that kind of, the way I would say reality is holographic, in the sense of every piece is the whole, because it's just a seamless whole. And the nice thing about that is that there's an opportunity with any experience, whether it's a pleasant, a painful, or a neutral one, to explore what it is. In other words, what is whatever we're conceiving of it to be descriptively, what's actually there as an actual concrete experience. So if we say, I'm worried, what's there? Well, we could say there's a kind of complex interplay of thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, future wonderings. I just used a bunch of words to try to characterize what makes up worry. But each one of those things that I say are kind of the constituent parts that constitute this gestalt thing called worry. Take one of them, like thoughts. Okay, well, what is a thought as an experience? Like, what's actually there when you say, I'm worrying about how my daughter is doing? Like, what is that that's present? There's the content and the whole narrative that it seems to be suggesting, but what's actually concretely there that I'm labeling as a worried thought? And that can be investigated. And by looking is maybe not the best word. I sometimes would say feeling what's there, like feeling not as an emotion, but feeling like I would put my hand on the table to feel the presence of the table, right? The hardness, I just feel the hardness of the table that my hands are touching. So feeling the presence of thought, like what is thought actually? And it is absolutely an experiential question, right? It's not merely an analytical question, like the firing of neurons or whatever. It's like, no, what is that? What is the substance of thought? And that investigation can reveal that the basis of thought is empty of thingness, in the sense of I can't really, I have this curious thing that happens anytime I look, which is, I was also saying earlier, like it's mirage-like in the sense of there it is. Like I'm not going to deny that there's thought present or worry present. But when I go to look for it, I come up empty-handed. I can't find it. It's there, but I can't find it. I can't delineate it. I cannot be clear. I can't locate it. I just keep looking and I just find more and more and more. I find more detail, more subtlety, more nuance, but I never finally get to the arrival of there is the essence of what a thought is, or there is the essence of worry, like as something findable. And that is a very curious thing. That discovery of its unfindability experientially is to discover the freedom that is at the heart of everything. It's the freedom, it's the freedom from the descriptions and the designations, and it's inherent in all of our experience.
If all the ideation and all the ordinary feelings, they can't be pinned down as being
right,
anything discrete or anything. It's not an ultimate context. It has an insubstantiality, a sort of it's like blips on a screen or something like that.
Yeah,
a vibratory quality,
right,
rather than a concrete quality. So then what, this is more of a rhetorical question that I'm putting to myself and not only to you and all the people in the group. What I mean, it's sort of freaky what is actually there.
It's very freaky.
Yeah.
It's wild. It's completely wild, because it sounds insane to say it's there, but you can't find it. I call it one of the chapters in my last book, I call it the magic show of reality. It's like it's a magician, and it looks like, and there can be the sense of, like, look at something like separation. Like it definitely feels like, I know what that feels like, to feel like I'm a separate someone in a world that's separate from me. Like that's the magic. That's the magic show of the divine, of reality. It can absolutely appear that way, but there's an opportunity to explore, to see whether it holds up under scrutiny. And every time I look, it doesn't hold up under scrutiny, because what's revealed is I cannot get to the bottom. In other words, I cannot find evidence of what's being claimed by the description. And yet it may, and this is to kind of circle back to your question about kind of the once and for all part, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that the experience, like seeing a mirage as a mirage, may not make the mirage go away, or recognizing a dream as a dream doesn't necessarily make the dreaming stop. And so it's very possible, I've certainly had this experience where recognizing that, states of mind, including uncomfortable states, conventionally speaking, like whatever it might be, confusion or worry or sadness or grief or anger, or things that can strike the human as being uncomfortable, afflictive states of mind, they may not go away per se experientially, even when one recognizes their unfindable nature. But what changes from my vantage, and it has incredible pragmatic significance for the suffering human, is that there can be this sense of, yes, I would rather be having a different experience, let's say, like something like physical pain. Like that's a really obvious one, that most of us would be rather having a different experience, right? But one can discover in its indefinable basis, in its infinite basis, that's what makes it indefinable, is that it's infinite. It's made of infinity, in a sense. That's also the discovery of its problem-free nature. Because a problem, what makes a given affliction problematic is absolutely our description of it. our definition of it. It's like, what makes something a problem? That's the definition. It's so if this is ultimately not definable, and we were talking earlier about, I mean, I think one of the most powerful ways to see that is to notice how what's here is changing in the instant of its arising, which I think can reveal to us how the definitions can hold up under scrutiny, because we're only ever really defining a memory. Because the patterns, the seeming patterns are, how can you name the pattern and call it this when what you've just called it is now it's become something else. So that just can illustrate to us, like, wow, the defining is, we can't really pull it off, even though it seems like we can, and we talk in regular life, so to speak, as if, oh, I know what these things are, here's my words for them. But it's just it's very crude, you know, it's not really, how can you define something that's so dynamic? And so that reveals that, you know, there you are, and you're in a moment that's you wish wasn't there, but then you tap into the basis of the moment, it's transient, ever-changing, morphing into, and then hence indefinable nature, and you discover the great freedom of the freedom from the implications that language is suggesting, including that this is problematic, that this represents, you know, something is wrong with me, something is wrong with the world, or the world is not trustworthy, and all the kind of implications that language can suggest. Well, one discovers a freedom from those implications, essentially. And
I mean, I would go so far as, I mean, it's basically saying the same thing. Language is the way that language is what the apparent person, mind of a person uses to sort of orient. It's a reference, means of reference. So, but
exactly.
I would say the implications of the mind, or of the person, the implications of being a person is a, if it's taken at face value, that you know, I'm so and so,
right,
and this is my situation, that's a very claustrophobic way of
yes, and it ultimately doesn't hold up under scrutiny if we look. And that's exactly it in a nutshell. Well, we'll probably have another chance, I'm sure, to talk more about this, Michael, in another context, but thank you for the question. It's a really important one. I'm going to bring our time together to a close and thank everyone for joining. Always a pleasure. Thank you. And we'll see you again another time, I hope. So
thanks, John.
This was great. Thank you. Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Be well.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Too.
Thank you.